Okay, good evening, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Parveen Yaqub. I'm Deputy Vice Chancellor here at the university, and I'd like to wish you all a very warm welcome to the Wolfenden lecture. So this lecture is named in recognition of one of our previous Vice Chancellors, Lord Wolfenden. In 1957, he published a landmark report, later known as the Wolfenden Report, which recommended that homosexual behaviour between consenting adults in private should no longer be a criminal offence. He had recorded evidence from police, probation officers, psychiatrists, religious leaders and gay men whose lives had been affected by a law which criminalised homosexuality. And the report also noted that, in our view, the function of the law to intervene in the private life of citizens or to seek to enforce any particular pattern of behaviour. It is not, in our view, the function of the law to intervene. So a true landmark, and we celebrate this landmark with the Wolfenden lecture. And tonight I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting Dr Sophie Cook, an RAF veteran who made history by becoming the first transgender woman to work in Premier League football. She's now working to educate others about how to create psychologically safe and open cultures where everyone can thrive. Her autobiography, Not Today, How I Chose Life, has helped many people who struggle with their mental health and identity. She's been recognised with a British Outstanding Contribution to LGBT+ Life Award and an honorary doctorate. Sophie, we're honoured to have you here today to deliver the Wolfenden lecture, and we look forward to hearing from you. Please give Sophie your warmest welcome.
Thank you very much. Always nice to walk into a room full of lovely smiling faces on a freezing cold day, even though the sun was out for a little bit. 9 years ago, I was stood on the pitch at Charlton Athletics Ground the Valley as the football club that I supported my entire life, AFC Bournemouth, got promoted to the Premier League as Football League champions. I was the club photographer, and I was right at the centre of the celebrations on the pitch, being sprayed with champagne by footballers, which sounds so much cooler than it actually is. In reality, it's icky and sticky, and it bugs up your camera gear. Sorry about that. But this was the greatest day in the history of my football club. I mean, Bournemouth weren't the sort of club that would go to the Premier League. Only a few years earlier, we'd been in town square with buckets collecting coins to stop the club from going out of business. And there we were going to the Premier League. And yet, in the centre of all of that celebration, I was terrified. Because I knew that that summer, I was going to tell them something that I thought would end my career in football. I've known that I was transgender since I was about 7 years old. I remember going on a family holiday to a holiday park in South Wales. We all drove up there from Bournemouth in my dad's Ford Anglia, which, for those of you that's younger than me, which I think is everyone in the room, it was the car from Harry Potter. It was a real car, but it couldn't fly. So I think by the time we'd driven from Bournemouth to South Wales, my parents were sick and tired of the two screaming angels on the back seat. And this was the mid-70s. Good parenting was a bottle of Coke and a packet of crisps. So when we turned up, Mum and Dad went off to the bar. My brother went off to play football with some other kids. And I had to work out what I was going to do for the week. And I remember walking up to this group of kids that I'd never seen before and that I was never, ever going to see again. And I have no idea what came over me, but I walked up to them and went, "Hi, my name is Jenny." Now, mid-70s, sort of longer hairstyles, unisex styles. That and the fact that at 7 years old I was quite cute. I mean, I'm still cute, but got a bit of that with it now. But the thing is, no one batted an eyelid. At the end of the week, we're putting all the stuff back in my dad's car. And these kids came up and went, "Bye, Jenny." My parents looked at me. I looked at my parents because they were that tall. I was just like, weirdos. They've been doing that all week. Absolutely no idea what they're talking about. But this was 1974, and we didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have LGBT role models. Certainly didn't have trans ones. And I felt that I was the only person in the world that ever felt this way. I also felt that there was something truly deeply wrong with me, because why would I feel this way? And because of that sense of isolation and that sense of wrongness, at the age of 12, I first tried to take my own life. At 16, I joined the Royal Air Force. I was third generation Air Force. And at 18, I was a jet engine technician on a Tornado squadron in East Anglia. And one sunny August afternoon, I'm walking between two aircraft shelters and I heard a bang. So I immediately went to the source of the noise and discovered that there'd been an explosion on one of the aircraft. And a colleague of mine who was 19 years old had just lost his arm in this explosion. I was the first person on the scene. I put a tourniquet on it and I saved his life. Now, despite having 100 years experience of dealing with combat stress, the Air Force had no idea what to do. Their idea of mental health support was, if you need to talk to someone, go and talk to the priest. I was 18, he was 19. It shouldn't have happened in that sort of environment. In fact, the only support I got from the Air Force was within about a month of it happening. What they did was they shipped me off out to Germany. I think they thought they were taking me away from the source of my pain, but actually all they were doing was taking me away from my support network, all the people that knew what I'd just been through. So there I am, I'm stationed in Germany. I'm still 18 years old. I'm still transgender because it doesn't get better on its own. Only now I've got post-traumatic stress, struggling with depression, self-harming, suicidal ideation, and using alcohol just to try and numb all of that pain. And pretty much that was my life for the next 3 decades or so. When I left the Air Force, I went to Saudi Arabia for 8 years. By the time I came back from Saudi in '98, I'd begun to work out a little bit about what my gender identity meant. And I remember going to see my GP, and I'm pretty sure I was the first person that had ever walked into his waiting room and said this. And I just walked in there and said, I think I'm trans. Now, back in the late 90s, the first thing they had to do if someone said that was send you to the local psychiatric team to find out if you were mad. To ensure that you were sane enough that they could then refer you to the gender identity clinic. Apparently I wasn't that kind of mad. I was a different kind of mad. So they were able to sort of just send me off. And I remember going to the gender identity clinic back then in the late 90s. And I mean, there's problems with the gender identity service now, but back then it was a very different animal in a lot of ways. Hear a lot of talk about the gender identity service being a gatekeeper to stop people from transitioning, or to ensure that they meet certain standards of what a trans person is so they can transition. Now, back then, they had very strict guidelines about who they would and who they wouldn't treat. If I turned up there looking like this, they'd have kicked me straight out the door. You had to wear a wig, you had to wear makeup, had to wear a dress, you had to wear heels. You had to only be attracted to members of the opposite to your new gender. So not only was it a gender binary, it was also a sexuality binary as well. And if you deviate from any of those things, they'd go, well, you're not trans enough, or you're not serious enough about the process. And I remember having one particular appointment there. And despite it being the Charing Cross Gender Identity Clinic, it's actually at the Hammersmith and Fulham Hospital. And back then, I used to go up to London and I'd stay in a little hotel in Earls Court that was known to be friendly to trans people. I see someone nodding. You were, so I'm not going to pinpoint anyone, but a place called the Phil Beach Hotel. And I decided to walk from there to the hospital. It's only about a mile. I thought, yeah, it's a nice morning. I'll walk. Now, part way there was a massive cemetery. And I was new to wearing heels. I now know that you do not walk over a mile in a pair of high heels. So about halfway there, I was in extreme agony. My feet were bleeding from these shoes. So I remember being in the middle of this cemetery, crying, taking these shoes off because I was in so much pain. By the time I'd hobbled the rest of the way there, I was 5 minutes late for my appointment. And they therefore refused to see me that day and said, you're going to have to come back another day because you're late. So therefore, you're not taking it seriously. There was also a lot of hate out there. And everywhere I went, I would be abused. I remember getting abused in my GP's waiting room, and his response was, well, you chose to do this, so you're going to have to get used to it. Which first off shows he knew nothing about trans people, because you certainly don't choose it. And secondly, that you had zero empathy for other human beings. There I was 23 years old. It's hard now to believe quite how young I was at the time. And I was getting to be the real me after all these years. And then my partner got pregnant. And the plan was that our child would have two mothers from the day they were born, which back in 2000 was unheard of, especially if one of them was trans. But on the day that my son was born, he had a massive seizure. We nearly lost him. And as a result of that seizure, he ended up with a lifelong disability. And I remember holding this tiny little baby in my hands and thinking, your life's already going to be difficult enough as it is without having a transgender parent. So I took Sophie, the woman that I knew that I was and the woman that I was becoming, and I murdered her and I buried her for 15 years. Imagine what it's like taking something that's so intrinsically a part of who you are, whether it's your gender identity, your sexuality, your faith, not just not do it, but deny that it ever even existed. Every single day of the next 15 years, I thought about suicide. Even on days when I thought I was doing okay, I could be driving down the road and this little voice in the back of my head would say, yeah, but if you let go of the steering wheel, all your pain will end. I began self-harming with food. I looked in the mirror and I hated what I saw. In fact, what I saw wasn't me. The only place I could see me was somewhere lost deep inside my eyes. The rest of it was just this prison of flesh that had nothing to do with who I was. I looked in the mirror, I hated myself, so I ate. Oh, mate. Looked in the mirror, I hated myself even more, so I ate some more. And it just became the self-perpetuating cycle of self-hatred. And then in 2015, it reached the point where I knew that I either had to end my life or change it. Just gonna have a quick swig of water. Cheers. Now, when you watch a film and the lead character has a life-changing moment, you want it to be somewhere spectacular, like the top of the Empire State Building, the Taj Mahal. I had my life-changing epiphany moment in the Hotel Ibis Budget in Bradford. Place where many a weary traveller has looked out the window and thought, where the hell did my life go wrong? And it was like a light bulb going off above my head. And it's like, that's why you hate yourself so much. So I went into town, I bought some clothes, I bought some makeup, and the pain just stopped. And I thought, is that all it took to stop wanting to die? But of course it wasn't, because I then had to go home and effectively take a hand grenade throw it into my life and see where other pieces landed. So I went back and I told my wife, and she said, well, I knew it was going to come back. And then I had to think about telling the rest of the world and telling my kids. Now, at the time, my son was 15 and my youngest daughter was 11. So being 11, my youngest daughter knew all about the Kardashians. I still have no idea who they are, what they do, or why they're so rich. But she started asking these questions about Caitlyn Jenner. My wife said, well, she's asking these questions. Maybe now's the time to have this conversation. And I sat down with my kids and I said, you know the way you always knew you're a boy and you always knew you're a girl? Well, it wasn't like that for me. Deep inside, I always knew that I was a woman. And that caused me a lot of pain. And then my 11-year-old daughter went through 5 stages of grief in about 10 minutes. So she started with denial, went to bargaining, finally got to acceptance. And I knew she'd got to acceptance because she asked me what was in my makeup bag. It took her a few years, but she finally stopped asking the question because the answer was always the same. I'm in my 50s. It's the same 5 products as last time you asked. Unlike her, who has like all these organized drawers. Apparently, you need a different piece of makeup for every single millimeter of your face. Whereas I just go, I can get rid in 2 minutes now, and please don't say it shows, but I'm getting old, it's just very. But then I just think about telling the rest of the world. Now, at the time, Bournemouth were pushing for promotion to the Premier League. And as I've already established, we weren't the sort of club that this opportunity was going to come around terribly often. Have we got any football fans in here? No, we've got one here. Who do you support? Reading. Good answer. Local team. You've got your app with you. I wasn't asking for that amount of things. Forest Green. West Brom. Oh, a baggy. You're from the Midlands. Yeah, there's no other reason you would support the baggies. Anyone else? See, in previous years, I'd do these talks and be a load of Man United fans. Not so much nowadays. But the thing is, when you meet sort of a Man United fan or an Arsenal fan or a Liverpool fan down south, I say to them, what part of those towns are you from? And they go, I'm not. And it's like, well, why do you support them then? But the thing is, football fans' relationship with the game, and especially with their club, is not based on logic. It's based on passion. I'm sure you're very passionate about the baggies.
Yes, to be.
Exactly. See, I set them up and you knock them down. But the thing is, like, and football fans' relationships with their clubs, not only is it based around passion, it also involves a lot of superstition, a lot of, I mean, wearing the same socks every time, wearing the same knickers, all the rest. But the thing is, like, I think we lost online?
You're not lost. No,
Ah.
please carry on.
Apparently I'm still here. Well, they are unplugging you, which is never a good sign for our IT. But the thing is, football fans' relationship with the clubs is not based on logic. And if something happens to the team, football fans will find reasons why it happened. So Bournemouth, we were doing all right. We were winning loads of games. We were going to get promoted to the Premier League. That trans person came out and then we lost loads of games. I know it's not logical, but neither are football fans. And because I worked so closely with the players, I thought at this point, I can't do anything that might distract them from what they're trying to achieve. So I began living a double life. I've moved down to Brighton by this point. And if there's any LGBT people here that haven't been to Brighton, why? But I'd moved down to Brighton by this point, and during the week I was Sophie in Brighton, and at weekends I was going back to football and pretending to still be Steve. Except they noticed that something had changed. First thing they noticed was that I lost 5 stone in 4 months. And I used to say it's because I began caring about myself for the first time in my life. Whereas in reality now, 9 years down the line from that, what I realized is that at the point I transitioned, suddenly a lifetime of society's and the media's expectations of what a woman should be suddenly hit me full force, and I gave myself an eating disorder. I managed to convince myself that hunger was my body telling me I was losing weight, which, don't know about you, doesn't sound very healthy to me. I got both my ears pierced, which even in the blingy world of professional football got noticed. And I began to smile. And you know what? I don't think anyone had ever truly seen me smile before. We got promoted. We're getting ready for that first season in the Premier League. I'm ready to go back on Monday to start pre-season photographing the players. But on the Friday afternoon, I went to see my hairdresser down in Brighton about getting hair extensions. And she said, I can do it now for you if you want. I don't know about you, I'm all about instant gratification. So much so that I signed some very dodgy credit agreements when I was younger. But the thing is, she said, I go, get them in. And she starts putting these hair extensions in. And everything was great for about 20 minutes. And then I went, bugger. Am I allowed to say bugger? Too late, I've said it twice now. I've got to take photos of footballers on Monday morning. I'm going to have problems convincing them I was still Steve with a full head of hair. They're going to wonder how the fat bald bloke became this vision of loveliness. So I'm there. I'm on the phone all Friday afternoon, trying to get hold of my boss. Out of office, no reply. He's like, he finally called me back Saturday afternoon. He was at a family barbecue, and I'm sat in my car on my ex's drive. She's banging on the window, and I'm going, like I was on hands-free. She could hear every single word, as could half the street. So I came out to half the street at the same time I came out to the football. But he said, what's the matter? I said, I've got to tell you something before Monday morning. He said, what's that? I went, I'm transgender, which was literally the last 2 words anyone would have ever expected me to say. And then he went. Now, about a year later, I was giving a talk at the football club, and he was sat in the audience. And he came up to me afterwards. He said, do you remember what I said next? I said, not really. I was sort of freaking out a bit at that point. He said, because you'd lost so much weight so quickly, and because it's so urgent you speak to us, we all thought you were dying. So when you told me, I went, oh, is that all? So there you go. Premier League Football Club says it's better to be transgender than dying, which I think is pretty good philosophy. A couple of days later, I went in for a meeting at the club. And we're there in the owner's box overlooking the pitch. And there's the chairman of the club. There's the commercial director. There's our first team manager, Eddie Howe, who's now the manager up at Newcastle United. And it's me in my pencil skirt and Heelsley hat. First time they'd ever met Sophie. Pretty sure it's the first time any of them had ever met a trans person. I think they were all expecting David Williams talking and go, I'm a lady. So I like to think I was a bit classier than that. And the first surprise was that I still had a job. Now, despite the fact that trans people have certain protections under the Equality Act, I was a contractor. Strictly speaking, all they had to do was not renew my contract. And also, there were no other trans people working in the game at the time. I only knew 2 gay people working anywhere in football in 2015. Only one of them was out. So it was a very different environment within the game than it is today. I mean, admittedly, I still don't know any other trans people working in the game. Although actually I do know a few. But it was just totally unexpected. And then our manager, Eddie Howe, turned around to me and he said, what can I do to make this easier for you? And you know what? That's a really simple question. But I'll be honest with you, every single thing that's happened in my life since that moment emanates out from that question. Because what he did in that simple question was, first of all, he created a psychologically safe space for me to be true to myself and for me to be open. But he also let me know that it was okay for me to ask for help. And I said to him, well, I need to meet the players before a match day. First time I see me can't be as they're running down the tunnel because they'll be forgiven for doing a double take. So a couple of days later, I went into photograph a training session and the boys were all off warming up. And Eddie Howe came up to me and said, he's scared. And I said, you know what, for the first time in my life, I'm totally at ease with who I am. So no, I'm not scared. I called all the players together in a circle. And our assistant manager stood up and said, suppose you noticed our photographer's changed a bit since last season? Like ultimate Sophie. And then our captain just started clapping. And then the rest of the players joined in. And then our captain said, right, let's go and train. And I'm like, was that it? I built this up, so this was like a life-changing moment. But actually, when I look back now, I realised that they handled it perfectly. Here's a new piece of information, we've got it, now let's move on. And the thing is, when someone comes out, unless it directly affects you, and by directly I mean partner, child or parent, unless it directly affects you, all it is a new piece of information. And yet we live in a society where people not only feel that they have the right to pass judgment when someone comes out, but almost that they're obliged to. I mean, have you heard people say, well, I don't want to say this, but I feel that I have to? It's like, no, you don't. I was brought up, if you haven't got anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I think we lost that ability when we started communicating with our brains and our mouths and started communicating with our thumbs. It's just that filter has just gone nowadays. So there I was. I still had my job in football. And when I came out, I had friends that didn't want me to go back to the game. They said, you're going to be in danger of verbal abuse, you're going to be in danger of physical assault. And actually, over the years, football gave me so many amazing opportunities. I guess one of the greatest was that in 2018, I got invited to Moscow to speak to Russian LGBT activists during the World Cup there. And it was a scary situation for me, but I still had a British passport. I could still wave that magic bit of paper if anything happened to me. But my Russian friends didn't have that. And I remember traveling around Moscow, I remember holding up a trans pride flag in Red Square right outside the Kremlin. And I'm a professional photographer. If I'm taking a photo, I go stand there and I go, bang, bang, done. I gave my phone to my Russian friend, and I'm full of this flag in Red Square. And he's there, and he's lying on the floor, and he's like, take it. I'm going, take the photo, take the photo. Like, but I got to go to the World Cup semi-final, England against Croatia. England were 1-0 up. Football was coming home. The last time football was coming home when it didn't, before the next time football was coming home when it didn't. Before the women actually brought it home, because if a job's worth doing. But I was there at this World Cup semi-final and England were winning, and I was an out and proud trans woman with my trans pride flag, and I thought, how the hell did I, an out and proud trans woman, get to be stood at a World Cup semi-final? And I realised that it's because when I came out, I was presented with a choice. I could either keep my head down, sit on that touchline and hope that no one noticed that there was suddenly a trans person sat there. Or I could use the fact that football gave me a bit of a platform to stand up and start speaking out about the things that I thought were important. I guess the greatest opportunity for that was in 2017. I stood as a parliamentary candidate. And I stood in a constituency where only a year before I'd heard about trans people moving out of that area because of the abuse they were facing. It was a constituency where 2 years earlier, the party that I stood for only got 9,000 votes. And in fact, when I turned up, someone in the local party turned around to me and said, I don't know who they're trying to screw over more, us or you, because I shouldn't have even been there. It was. But in the space of 5 weeks, I went out and you know what? Not a single person on those doorsteps abused me for being trans. They abused me for lots of other things, but they didn't abuse me for being trans. And at the count, when they read out my name and then said that I got 21,000 votes, it was like 21,000 people voted for trans women. Still the closest that any trans candidate has ever come to getting elected as an MP. And you know what? I think we're further away than ever now, because I don't think any of the parties will stand a trans candidate anywhere that's winnable. I mean, I only stood there because it wasn't winnable. And I'll tell you what, when you've hated everything about yourself for your entire life, getting 21,000 votes in a general election feels like a pretty big endorsement of yourself as a person. But it doesn't protect you from the hate. And the hate was still there. I remember about a week after the election being in Westminster for a meeting, walking down the road, and this guy stepped out in front of me. And he's an inch away from my face, virtually spitting at me, demanding to see my genitals. And that can be a daily occurrence for a lot of trans people in this country. I mean, I'm very lucky that it's very rare that I get abuse on the streets nowadays. All the abuse seems to come online nowadays, which is why I'm no longer on Twitter, and I have a very small social media presence nowadays. It's a pity because I used to connect with so many people through social media, but it also became this hotbed of hate because no one's regulating it. The other thing those 21,000 votes didn't protect me from was my own inner demons, and they were still there. There was part of me that said, you've transitioned. Your mental health should be miraculously better. Everything should be great now. But it wasn't. I was still struggling with depression. I was still self-harming. I was still struggling with suicidal ideation. I was still struggling with addiction. And at that point, I realized that those feelings had nothing to do with what was happening to me in the world at that moment. Some days it was just like a little switch that went in my head. And at that point, I realized that I had no control over when I felt suicidal, but I did have control over how I reacted to it. And at that point, I came up with a philosophy for myself to keep myself safe. And that philosophy was, I know that one day I might try to kill myself because I don't know how to stop feeling this way, but it won't be today. And in the meantime, I'm going to do the best that I can to enjoy every single day. And then on the day that I die, in many, many years' time, I'll look back and realize that I didn't get around to doing it. What that did was it gave me permission to have those days without heaping the guilt and shame on top of them. Because it was the guilt and shame that always made me spiral down into despair. As soon as I let go of the guilt and shame, I could stop thinking about it emotionally and start thinking about it logically. Now, as soon as I began thinking about my suicidal ideation logically, I knew that I'd never do it. Because logically, I knew that suicide wouldn't be the end of my pain. All it would do is take my pain and give it to the people that love me. And for me, that's my kids. So that's never going to happen. Also, logically, I knew that the feeling would pass because it always does. I first tried to take my life when I was 12 years old. I'm now 27. That was quite hurtful. That's 40 odd years of being what I describe as a functioning suicidal person. I know that that will always be a part of me. I'm also a recovering addict, a recovering alcoholic. And I know that each of those things will always be a part of who I am. I have no control about those urges. I have no control about those feelings, but I do have control about how I react to them. And the thing is, as soon as I let go of the guilt and shame, those days started coming less frequently. And when the feelings did come, the feeling passed more quickly. And eventually the gaps between those episodes got longer and longer and longer. And you know what? I probably feel suicidal about once a year now. I know that there will always be something inside that just that switch goes. But the interesting thing now is that because I understand the way it works in my brain and my soul and my psyche, I don't give it any power. It's like I acknowledge it. I go, feel suicidal today. That's a bit shit. Sorry, Toby. Said I wouldn't swear. Don't normally. That just slipped out. It's Toby's bad influence. But the thing is, I don't give it any power. But then I realised that actually, you know what? Some of the times when it did happen was because of the hate that I was facing. A couple of years ago, I was given an amazing opportunity to help a lot of people, which led to a major amount of abuse and hatred, both online and in the press. And despite this amazing opportunity I've been given, I began thinking, this opportunity is going to be taken away from me, because the people that gave me the opportunity are going to look at all the hate and go, you know, it's just not worth the hassle. And that took me back to that dark place. Didn't quite take me to suicide, but it took me to suicide's waiting room. Or as an estate agent would call it, I was suicide adjacent. You could see it if you like stood on tiptoe and looked out the window. Like my flat's got a sea view. But the thing is, I remember I was away with my son. My son's that little baby son. He's now 23 years old, as tall as me, obsessed with cars. We were at Brands Hatch for the weekend to watch car racing, and all this stuff was going on. And the anxiety and the pain of all this hatred was like a physical knot in my chest. And I thought, why are these people obsessed with you? I have no opinions about their lives or how they live their lives, and yet I seem to live in their heads. And then I caught myself and went, hold on, you're away with your son, one of the people you love most in the whole wide world, and you're thinking about them? You're letting them live in your head. At that point, I made a decision. The only people allowed to live in my head are people I love. And then I made another realization. It's like, if I could use that philosophy to take away the power of my inner demons, could I use it for the external ones? And I thought, well, these people that abuse me online, I can't control what they say about me, but I can control how I react to them. And at that point, a lot of their power just diminished. And I just decided, you know what, the best thing I can do is live my life well. But when I look at the abuse that I face, and I look at so many of the things that are happening in the world at the moment, I see a lot of pain. I think that hate comes from pain. Hate is pain manifesting. And hate hurts the person that's hating as much as it's hurting the person. And when you're on the receiving end, it's very difficult to say that, but the thing is, when I see people giving abuse, when I see people spouting racism, homophobia, transphobia, I don't think that they're homophobic, racist, or transphobic. I think they're people that say and do racist, homophobic, and transphobic things. Because if we say that they're racist or homophobic, that's their identity. And identities are immutable. As anyone that's ever tried to talk a trans person or a gay person out of their identity, it's not, it's who we are. When I see people saying and doing homophobic, racist, transphobic things, I see people that are doing these behaviours. And the thing is, if we class them as behaviours rather than identity, then there's room for education, there's room for awareness building, there's room for a dialogue. Because I don't think, I choose not to believe that people are evil. I choose to believe that people don't deliberately go out to hurt other people for no reason. Which is why I think that hate is so illogical, because you don't know the person that you hate. It's illogical. I think that actually we just need to have that dialogue, because without that dialogue, we're never going to move forwards. It's important that we understand that actually everyone feels that they're trying to do the best that they can. Even the people that abuse me, even the people that sent me death threats on social media, think that they're doing what's right. I don't think they're evil people. I think they're people with flawed belief systems and flawed information. And for me, I think it's important that I try to help them to have better information and better belief systems rather than just condemning them. That might just be me. And I know when you're on the receiving end of hate, it's very, very difficult to actually look at it that way. But I just choose to believe that people aren't evil, that people are trying to do the best, because I also believe that hate comes from fear. A lot of fear is illogical. Hate is certainly illogical. When I came out, people kept saying to me, "You're so brave." Admittedly, I was getting death threats. I didn't think anyone was actually going to kill me. It was just a little bit upset. Well, in fact, it was very upsetting at the time. Death threats are not nice things. I didn't count them as credible threats, as the Secret Service would call it if I was president, but I'm not a president. I'm not even the Queen. Although when I did my TED talk before I went on, now I was going to, I'll bleep out the swearing. I had the honour of doing a TED talk, and it was at the Brighton Dome, which is a massive 2,000-seat theatre in Brighton, and there was a comedian comparing it. And before I went on, we stood backstage, and he's got my CV, and he's going, "How do I introduce you?" I went, "Just introduce me as Queen of the effing world." It was a throwaway glib comment, right? He then walked out on stage in front of 2,000 people and now, ladies and gentlemen, the Queen of the... And I'm like, they're either going to hate me because they think I'm right up myself, or I walked out on stage and the front row was all school kids. And I was like, yeah. But actually, it led to the best review that I've ever had. Someone tweeted, "All the speakers were great, but Sophie Cook lived up to her Queen of the effing world statement." Or billing. I laughed, I cried, I had snot running down my face. It's like, if you get the snot running out of people's face, then you've done well. But when I came out, people were saying to me, "You're so brave." And I started thinking, you know what, I don't feel brave. I just feel like me. And admittedly, increasingly, sort of 9 years on from my transition, the thing I identify most as now, it's not trans or pansexual or any of these things. The thing I identify most as today is me. Whatever that means, whatever that encapsulates. I stopped wearing wigs last year because I went, you know what? People that love me and know me will always see me. People that hate me will always see a man, whatever I do. At various times, trans people have been told, "Oh, you're just caricatures of women," because obviously trans guys don't exist, they're not part of their whole narrative. But when we choose not to conform to the gender binary, well, obviously we're not trans enough. It's like, make up your mind, which stereotype are we living up to? But people are saying you're brave. And at that point I realised, you know what, I'm not brave, I'm not the brave one. The person that I was before I transitioned was the brave one. They woke up every single day wishing they were dead. They managed to hold it together long enough for me to be here. I now have a love and respect for that poor tortured soul that he could never have had for himself. And I wrote a poem to him, thanking him for being strong, thanking him for being brave all of those years and just managing to hold it together so that I could be here. And I posted this poem on social media. My then 11-year-old daughter, who, by the way, is one of the reasons why I don't do regret. People say, "Don't you regret that you didn't transition in 2000? And I say, well, 2000, the world wasn't ready for me. I wasn't ready for the world. And if I transitioned, I wouldn't have my daughter. She's worth 15 years of pain. She's now 20 years old and a student at Bournemouth University, so I know I've got at least 15 years of pain to look forward to from her. But the thing is, she went on there and she saw this poem, and in the space of 2 sentences, she summed up the power of authenticity, the power of living your own true life, and even the power of love more eloquently than I ever could. And she just wrote, "You're my hero. Steve was great, but Sophie's better. Thank you very much."
Hi everyone, I'm Alm University's Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, and I'm going to be facilitating the Q&A for Sophie. And Sophie, thank you so much for your amazing talk. There was a lot there that resonated with me, and if we have time, I'm going to ask a couple of questions as well. But I'd like to pass to the audience first, if they have any questions for Sophie.
Thank you very much. This is fantastic. I'm really easy going, one of the co-chairs of the staff network, and it's wonderful to have this also as a flagship event in our LGBTQI plus history month. I'm going to ask a question kind of related also to my own personal interest, and even I was also involved in politics in different ways. And you mentioned that you think we've moved backwards, that it's even less likely political parties today would feature a trans candidate in a marginal or winnable seat. And I was wondering what you think, so assuming I agree with you, what do you think we should do about it? So how do we go about changing political culture in this country so that that isn't the case? An easy one to start with.
Oh, it's a very easy one. If I was to give you a truthful answer, it would be very all of human history is based on the concept of exploitation, whether it's the exploitation of the planet, whether it's the exploitation of other species, whether it's the exploitation of people. All of human history is about exploitation. Our political system is about exploitation. Exploitations of fear is exploitation. Exploitation of just othering other groups, and we see it all the time at the moment. Only way we and the human race and the planet is ever going to survive is if we move away from exploiting each other constantly. Our system doesn't allow that. We came close a number of years ago to a major systemic change, but the entire system rallied against it. We had 2 politicians who realised that actually it wasn't enough to change the government. We needed to change the system. And as soon as they said that publicly, they were doomed, because the system was never going to let them change. I think democracy's failed us. I think democracy continues to fail us. Two-party system is a sham and a pretense. Just puts in different flavours of the same thing. How are we going to change it? We educate our children. We teach our children strength. We teach our children to think for themselves. We teach them to be critical thinkers. And like Sarah Connor, we take them up into the mountains. And no, it's not fair nature. But that's it. We need to ensure that, because you know what? It's not something that's going to change in one election. It's not something that's going to change in 3 or 4 elections. It's something that's going to take generations to change. And the thing is, it's the same in every single nation around the world, regardless of what their political system is. So how do we change it? I'd love to give you an answer. I really would, but I just think that education and self-reliance and the ability to actually just look at what you're told and actually go, well, that's not true. I mean, the thing is, like, I was always one of these people that grew up thinking, how could what happened in Germany in the 30s happen? And I remember going to Berlin a few years ago, and there's a big museum in the centre of Berlin called the Topography of Terror Museum, and it sets out the history of the rise of the Nazis in a timeline. Each one was a very little thing, tiny little thing. Well, you start by identifying minorities, then you start by segregating minorities, and then eventually it just reaches a point where actually it's unstoppable. And I fear that sort of certain parts of the world are starting to go down this path where you're constantly blaming others, you're constantly finding ways of dividing people rather than bringing people together. And it's only by coming together that we will ever change anything. Hence the fact I'm no longer involved in it. But thanks for the easy question as a starter.
I'll show a question at the back.
So we really enjoyed the talk. I've got a question and a story, actually, just a very quick one. So the question is, how do we re-educate a tribal society? And I use tribal in a footballing sense, so you can keep that in mind. And the story is actually, I've coached 3 18-year-old football teams at grassroots level, and the biggest lesson we learnt as a team during that was between 2 seasons, when one of the dads at the end of that season came up very brave and said, next season I won't be Colin, I'll be Vicky. And there was nothing that we got in all the grassroots FA literature to prepare us for that. So we did what you said before, we just treated it as normal, make sure that the lad was okay, centre half, great centre half, and we just carried on. And what was incredible was the tolerance and acceptance that followed the example that we set as coaches. There was never any mickey taking, there was never any anger. In fact, we protected Vicky as she went through that transition. So using that as a springboard, how can we re-educate a tribal society?
There was a lot of different elements to that. First thing is, in our society, we've seen lots of examples, and we hear that tribalism is bad. Tribalism in itself is not bad. Tribalism in itself means family and community. And actually, you know what? It's great being part of a tribe. It's great feeling that sense of belonging, as long as it's used to promote positive ideas and that sense of belonging, that sense of togetherness. Because ultimately, let's face it, when you're a football fan, there's nothing better than being amongst your fans and feeling that you belong to something bigger than yourself. The problem comes when it's used to actually attack people from a different tribe. And that's not true tribalism. That's perverting the idea of what a tribe is in order to other a different group. So I don't think the tribalism is the problem. I think the problem is othering. You said about sort of you led by example, and because you came together and people took up on that, and you said that sort of their tolerance and acceptance followed. I remember when I first transitioned, one of the first people that I told was a friend of mine that I've known for years. And to give you a clue what sort of person she is, she's a member of a Facebook group called Grammar Checking Nazis. So she goes on, and her friends go on social media posts posted by the far right and go, don't you mean there rather than there, and you're rather than you're. Anyway, so I was talking to her about the difference between when I tried to transition in 2000 and actually transitioning in 2015. I said, yeah, people are much more accepting nowadays. And she went, whoa, 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 whoa. If you say accepting, that implies there's something they need to accept. And I went, okay. She said, come up with something better. And I went, people are much more tolerant. And I went, no, because that means there's something I have to tolerate. And I'm like, I was really stumped then. And eventually I came up with the phrase, people are more open to diversity. Admittedly, this was 2015. Might not say the same thing nowadays. But the thing is, and that's it. And the thing is, language really does matter. Language really does have power and things like this. It's like I always say to people, like when you meet someone and you ask them about their pronouns, the common term for a number of years has been, what are your preferred pronouns? I don't like that. Because preferred implies that it's optional. They're not my preferred pronouns. These are my pronouns. Whether you like them or not is your problem, not mine. So for me, it's really important how we frame language and how we understand that actually language has power. But going back to the main question about how we stop tribalism being a negative force in our society, I think that we need to go back to the idea of, see, our society isn't one massive, I mean, the Labour Party always said broad church. It's not broad church. Our society isn't. It's like lots of different tribes. And tribes are great because it allows people to find their people. Like, people ask me about social media. Is social media good or bad? I've had some really negative experiences on social media. I've also had some amazing experiences on social media. Social media, like any media, can be a force for good or a force for evil. Because of social media, a young person going through what I went through need never feel that they're the only person in the world that felt that way. Need never feel that they're alone in this, because they can find their tribe. They can find the people that look like them, that think like them, that have a similar outlook on the world. So social media is great because it's allowed us all to connect with everyone. Social media is also terrible because it's allowed us all to connect with everyone. And the fact that people can connect with people and abuse them without any fear of any consequence. But I just think that we need to embrace the idea of tribe and as an idea of family. And I think that, like I say, football does family really well. At its core, football is about families. And like all families, sometimes it can be a bit dysfunctional. Sometimes there can be people in there that are abusing the concept of family. You just need to ensure that their voices are in a minority rather than amplified to the point where people think they're the majority. Thanks.
Yeah, at the front here.
I never give yes or no answers.
I think that was amazing. You described quite a negative experience with a GP years back. Do you think things are better now in terms of? Yeah.
I've got a long-term training contract with the NHS, and one of the statistics that I use in that presentation is the fact that 55% of GPs have little to no understanding of trans identities, trans lives. Very first time I did this training session, I had 2 GPs sat in the audience. When the slide came up, I went, and one of them put his hand up and he went, that figure's much higher. He said, there's most GPs I know nothing about trans identities. There's a lot of really good people in the NHS working against terrible, terrible constraints on what they can do. Some things are better, some things are a lot worse. The fact that trans people have to wait up to a decade now for an appointment at a gender identity clinic, after going through years of trying to prove that they're trans enough. Also the fact that actually trans identities are still massively pathologized. I don't need a doctor to tell me I'm trans. I don't need a doctor to say that I'm trans enough. I don't need a doctor to say that I'm trans enough to get a gender recognition certificate. The greatest expert on my identity is me. And society needs to start getting better at understanding that the biggest expert on any of our lives, not just the trans people, but all of us, is ourselves. No one can come in from outside and go, well, you know what, actually, I know more about who you are than you do. So we need to, it's only a few years ago that actually being trans was a mental illness. It's only a few years before that being homosexual was down as being a mental illness. They're not. They're human identities, and it's not about a condition. It's not about a diagnosis. It's about respect. And for me, so many of the human race's problems could be fixed if we just use two simple words: respect everyone. When I joined the Air Force, I was told that I had to respect officers because they had the Queen's Commission. Being young and stupid, I said, no, they have to earn my respect. Now that I'm old and stupid, I know that no one has to earn my respect. Everyone has given my respect from the very first moment I meet them. Some people try to lose it really quickly, but they get it from the first moment I meet them. Because for me, unless you go into any interaction with total respect for the other person, you're already setting that interaction up to fail. If you want to give every interaction the best possible chance to succeed, you need to go in with an open mind. Even if it's someone that's been sending you death threats online, I will go into that and go, what's all this about? But the thing is, we see that very rarely in society nowadays. There's so many preconceptions about everything. So to give a very long answer to your question, the NHS has got problems in so many different areas, not just trans care. For me, the NHS is the greatest jewel that this nation has ever had, and we need to protect it. And there's a lot of people working really hard with very limited resources, and we just need to do everything we can to support them, because I want the NHS to be there for my kids and my grandkids. I'm not saying politicians. I don't have to say a lot of politician type things, you know.
We've got some questions online, Sophie.
Have we? Hello, online people. Thank you for tuning in. You missed the tea and biscuits and it was cake. They're laughing because it wasn't.
So this is from an anonymous person online. If you had anything to say to the younger generation of trans people now, many who now will be starting their journey, what would you say? And what's the one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
One piece of advice I'd give my younger self is don't wear miniskirts. Your thighs just won't carry it off. My advice to the younger generation of trans people is sorry. Sorry that my generation left it all in such a mess for you. Stay strong. Stay brave. Look after each other. And always know that you are worth it. You mean something. Your existence means something. Your identity is valid. And don't ever let someone else tell you that it isn't. And it will get better. I know it seems tough and it seems really dark at the moment, but it will get better. And you know why it'll get better? It'll get better because you lot make it better. So thank you for what you're going to bring to the world. Oh, yeah.
And we have another online question. As a university, what do you think we could do to support our LGBTQIA+ community? What's most helpful and impactful given your experience?
I think, and I touched on it talking to someone earlier, the universities are this amazing little bubble in our society. Brighton is this amazing bubble. I mean, most cities have to have gay villages where LGBT people can go. In Brighton, a lot of our gay businesses are suffering because we don't need to go to them. We can go, they need to be really good for us to go there because we can go anywhere. So the thing is, like, universities offer this place where actually people feel safe. And the greatest thing to help nurture minds, to help nurture people's freedom of expression, both of their identity, but also of like their creativity and all the rest of that, is creating that safety. Because none of us can be true to ourselves. None of us can be creative in a world where we don't feel safe. So I think the greatest thing that any university can do is to create that safety and that sense of community and that sense of belonging. It tells us that, you know what, you are part of our tribe. You are part of our family. And you know what? We care about the members of our tribe. We care about members of our family and our community. We will treat every single person as an individual, no matter what their identity. We're not going to put you all into a box. We're not going to stereotype you. We're going to respect every single one of you. And we're going to support you, and we're going to nurture you, and we're going to ensure that you feel able to be the very best that you can be true to yourself, without judgment, without preconceptions. And I think that's what universities do so well. Universities, I never went to university. I joined the Air Force at 16. I went to university for one day to pick up an honorary doctorate, which was... I'm open to two, if it's not... But the thing is, like, even though I only went to Bournemouth Uni for one day to pick up that, I feel part of their family because of the way they treat me and the way they embrace me. And I think that that's something that I see, especially for young people, so far away from home and all this. It's like, it's a big old scary world out there. This is a safe place where they need to feel they can be true to themselves. And I think that's the great. I mean, there's lots of things you can do about gender neutral toilets, but they're things. For me, it's about that very real feeling about what a community means and creating that safety.
I have time if anyone else in the room has a question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Amazing. So you mentioned like struggling with substance abuse and stuff, and that is something that disproportionately affects LGBT people. I myself am a recovering addict, but how or do you feel that it's been harder being trans? Because I know for me, it's really affected my recovery journey. Like, I've stopped going to in-person NA meetings in this area because despite being a group of drug addicts, they're extremely prejudiced. So yeah, I would like to just touch a bit more on your story and help.
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for your openness and your honesty in sharing that. It's amazing, isn't it, the way that a marginalised and other group can still be prejudiced towards other people. And we see this in all forms of prejudice, that whole intersectionality thing of like, these are the combined systems of oppression that affect me. But you know what? I'll still manage to have a little bit of prejudice for that person over there because they don't look exactly like me. And let's face it, the LGBT community is not free of that. We see racism in the LGBT community. We see body shaming. We see all sorts of things in the community. Of course, LGBTQ people are disproportionately affected with mental health issues, with substance abuse issues, not because we're LGBT, but because of the prejudice that we face and because of the othering that we face. And let's face it, a lot of our mental health issues and our substance abuse issues are because we're excluded from our tribe or our family or our community. So we're lost and alone. We don't have that belonging. And belonging is such a central human need that when it's taken away, that void needs filling with something. I think one of the other problems that we've got in the LGBTQ community is that in a lot of parts of it, or some parts of it, substance misuse is actually normalised. And that can create its own issues, because then you've almost got peer pressure to actually conform to actually misusing substances. So I think in terms of recovery, for me, recovery was about my own sense of self. I must admit, I didn't go the 12-step route, because for me, I was never going to give something up to a higher power. This is for me to take responsibility for. I will be the higher power. I will find a way past this. So I think for me, it was about taking personal responsibility for my own actions. And you know what? And it was also about using the same things that I used to for my mental health and the hate. First step on my recovery was realizing I have no control over these urges, but I do have control over how I react to them. And when I fell off the wagon, I didn't heap the guilt and shame on top of it. I went, okay, be kind to myself. I did that. Shouldn't have done that. Really wish I hadn't. But why did I do that? What were my triggers? What were the things that set me on the course? What were the things that enabled it? So I had to cut certain people out of my life. I had to cut certain behaviours out of my life. I even had to stop watching certain TV shows, because like I watched certain TV shows and but the thing is, it was difficult and it was hard, and it took me a lot of failed attempts before I managed to do it. A big part of that journey was being kind to myself and going, you know what? You did this, you've fallen off the wagon and you've done this and that and the other. Don't beat yourself up about it, just do better next time. And eventually it got to the point, like my suicidal ideation, eventually those urges got further and further apart. And eventually I reached a point where, you know, I still think about it occasionally. And I go, well, that would be a really stupid idea, wouldn't it? But I just think a big part of that road to recovery is kindness to self, rather than beating yourself up for it. So yeah. And 12 steps are all going, oh no. No, because the next one sent me death threats. No, they won't. No, they won't. Do not report that on the internet. I was joking. Badly.
I have a question. So there's I know we're having a chat upstairs, but lots of what you said here resonates with me. And I quite recently, through having therapy, learned around the self-loathing.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I was very, very maybe obsessive about my weight. But then when I felt like, oh, I'm not any good, I'd eat more and eat more. But I didn't see it as that self-loathing until quite recently. And part of that was knowing who you are, but also, as you've touched on, Sophie, about people believing that they know you better than you yourself, which I completely agree with. I think that's nonsense. And as a bi man who's married to a man, there's a lot of erasure.
Oh, God.
And like you're saying about within the community, I face more biphobia within the community than outside. And that's very much related to your mental health, right, and how you see yourself. And my question is, relating back to, I really like your way of educating people and seeing behaviours and potential changes, but that can be really hard to get to that point, because it can feel that someone's very much erasing your identity or debating your identity. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you got to this, what I think is a really lovely approach, but many of us may struggle to get to that point.
So I'm going to come over this side so I can face you, but also face the camera.
Oh yeah.
Like having transitioned very publicly back in 2015, there was a lot of media attention on trans identities around 2016, 2017, around the Gender Recognition Act reform, consultation and things like that. And one of the things that the press, especially, well, all of the press, but particularly broadcast media, liked to do was have balance and have debates. Now, it was interesting that sort of whenever there was a trans person on, for balance, they had to have someone that was anti-trans. Funny enough, I've never seen them have a racist on to counteract someone being black on telly. But it was really interesting where they drew the line at what balance was. And the funny thing is that when I was involved in politics, people said that I was attention seeking in the media floozy. But actually they didn't know how many things I turned down. I turned down much more than I was asked for. And whenever people said, oh yeah, I got asked to go on Newsnight, and I said, who else are you having on? They said, oh, I'm not going to name him, very prominent anti-trans writer. And I went, I'm not coming then. Like, because I'm not going to come on so that you can debate my identity. Because my identity is not up for debate. Talking to people and trying to educate people and understanding that actually their prejudices are based on flawed belief systems and flawed information is not the same as allowing them to debate my identity. For me, if you're going to have that dialogue, it needs to start from respect from both sides. I have respect to say to them, look, you've got your beliefs. I don't agree with your beliefs, but I'm not going to condemn you for them. I'm going to try and talk to you about them, about why you hold those beliefs. If you want me to extend that respect to you, you need to extend a similar degree of respect to me. Part of that is respecting my pronouns, part of that is respecting my name, part of that is respecting my identity. And if they're not prepared to do that, that's them putting up the barriers, not me. Because the only way that you can actually move forward with these things is mutual respect, which is why I will never shout at them. Because two sides shouting at each other doesn't achieve anything. And there's plenty enough people out there shouting at me. I'm not going to add to the cacophony. I just want to dial it down, get it to a point where people can actually think about what they're saying and actually discuss things. But discussion is not a debate. It has to be based on respect. And I know exactly what you mean about bi-erasure. I'm pansexual, which just people say it's because I'm greedy. It's like, well, no, it just means I'm turned down by 100% of the population. But it is out, yeah. Actually, not so much anymore, because you know what, I don't care anymore. But the thing is, yeah, this whole idea that sort of, let's face it, if you buy, you can't pick a side, or you need to, yeah, you're just being greedy. It's like, or if you're in a relationship with a man, well, obviously you're gay now. No, I'm still bi. It's like my identity, my sexuality hasn't changed. And it's the other thing with bi people is that quite often people think you're promiscuous. Actually, being bi does not mean you're promiscuous. You're just as likely to be monogamous when you find the person you want to have a relationship with as anyone else in the population. It's just the level of prejudice within our own community, it can be off the scale sometimes.
Definitely, yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. Do we have any more questions online? We do, yeah.
What was it like having to hide Sophie after deciding you were going to transition?
Back in 2015, it nearly killed me. It really nearly killed me. But one of the things about humans is that, you know what, we do denial really well. You can get really professional at denial. I mean, I was Olympic level at denial. And it reached a point where, you know what, I think I pushed it down so much that actually it ceased to seem real to me. And what that did was it created trauma in me. And when you talk about trauma-informed care and the fact of understanding the trauma that people have been through in their lives and on their journey, that level of denial, where you're not just not doing this stuff, you're denying that it ever even existed, just hollowed me out. And I look at photos of Steve, and there's one particular photo where my granddaughter was born, and Steve sat in his photo, and there's my two daughters and my granddaughter, and yet the eyes are dead. There's nothing in my eyes because I was just emotionally disconnected from the world around me. As a defense mechanism, I stopped engaging with the world. And all of that hate just turned inward and started consuming me from the inside out. So yeah, I didn't cope with it very well, to be honest. And I know that if I hadn't transitioned in 2015, I probably wouldn't be here now. And I have this amazing relationship with my two youngest kids, and I carry a certain amount of parental guilt. The fact that I transitioned when my youngest was 11, and the fact that I wasn't able to be part of their lives in the way that I wanted to at that time. But I know that actually the person I was before wasn't actually engaged in their lives anyway. They were present, but they weren't engaged. Whereas now when I'm in the room with my kids, I'm utterly engaged with them. I see them, they see me, and we communicate on this level I could never have done before. It was a form of, I used to refer it as like being in a zombie state. I was there, I was walking around, but I just wasn't there. No one had the kindness to destroy my brain or sever my head, in the words of Shaun of the Dead. I'm talking to you, but it's them on there, isn't it?
Brilliant, thank you very much. I'm now going to pass to Parveen for closing comments. Thank you, Sophie.
Sophie, thank you. That was authentic and powerful. I didn't look round to see if there was any snot on faces, but I know that your words will have had a lasting impression and you've created a space for some open discussion tonight. So thank you so much for delivering the Wolfenden lecture tonight. Let's thank Sophie, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been lovely to have you here.